Okay, so the first thing is can everybody see my screen and can everybody hear me?
Not loud enough.
I can hear you.
Okay, so that being the case, why don't we get started? Because I have 30 minutes and we're looking forward to questions and answers, and there's the parshat for today. Well, so the presentation is about post-exilic Judaism, and you know that next week, Tisha B'Av is going to be remembered. Tisha means ninth. B'Av is of the month of Av. And the reason why this is so important is because both the first temple and the second temple were destroyed on the same day. But what we're going to do here tonight is that we're going to be talking about what happened to us immediately after the destruction of the first temple. Okay, so to have a little overview, the Babylonian exile, and I'm going to be talking about BCE, before the current era. It was a relatively short period of time, from 597 to 538, call it 61 years, plus another 10 years or so, because after we started coming back to, or we were given permission to come back to Israel, or Judah, for that matter, it was called Judah. It took about 10 years or so for the exiles to come back. But those 10 years made a huge difference. So all the 3,000 years or so pre-exilic, we started what we now call Judaism. Judaism really changed during the Babylonian exile. And then anything that happened after those 70 years is what we call post-exilic. Well, two prophets, Jeremiah and Isaiah. So if you read the book of Jeremiah, you read the book of Isaiah, you would know about the destruction of the first temple. Both of them actually lived during the time of the destruction of the first temple. Jeremiah saw the destruction of the first temple, and after the temple was destroyed by the Babylonians, actually he went back to Egypt, believe it or not. So Jeremiah died in Egypt. And just a little trivia here, Jeremiah, the book of Jeremiah is the longest book in the Bible. And the book of Isaiah is the fifth largest book in the Bible. So you can see they have a lot to say. Prophet Isaiah, on the other hand, was actually exiled to Babylon, and we're going to have a lot more to say about Isaiah. And then after Cyrus the Great of Persia allowed us to come back to Judah, we're going to be talking, Ezra and Nehemiah were the ones that came back. I'm sure that you all know that during those 60 years of our exile in Babylon, our sages compiled what we now call the Bible, the Hebrew Bible, what the Christians call the Old Testament. They were the ones who did it. There was a few things that were added to the Bible afterwards, after we came back to Judah. But for the most part, what we call the Tanakh, the Torah, the Nevi'im, and the Ketuvim, was actually compiled in Babylon. And that's why we use today the Babylonian Bible. Little bit of a history here and a time scale so that we know what time we're talking about. In the year 950 BCE, Solomon built the temple that was going to be destroyed. Right after Solomon, in the year 1931, Israel and Judah actually divided the kingdom. So Israel ended up with 10 tribes and Judah ended up with 2 tribes, Judah and Benjamin. Then in 792, the Babylonians conquered the northern kingdom and the northern kingdom of Israel. Those were the 10 tribes that got lost. So the only thing that remained after that was the southern part, which is Judah. In 597, Nebuchadnezzar destroyed Jerusalem. And so after that, we went into exile. So I just wanted to give you a very quick overview of the time scale that we're talking about. I hope that everybody can see this slide. I hope so. Hello?
Looking good.
Oh, okay.
I can see it.
Okay, so because, I don't know whether you have a large monitor or whether you're looking at it on your phones or something, but what I wanted to show you here, this is the first temple. So here are the walls of the first temple. Here are the gates. You had to go through two sets of gates on the inside. In this courtyard in here is where we used to do all of the animal sacrifices, and the Holy of Holies was right here. I hope that you can all see it. So this is the first temple. Now, when the temple was destroyed, the Babylonians thought that this was such an important victory for them that they built an entire wall dedicated to the fall of Jerusalem. And archaeologically speaking, it was actually found. So the British, who were in Iraq at the time, took it with them and they brought it to the British Museum, which is the one you see here. And this, inside of the British Museum, this entire wall in here, which is enormous, it's called the Assyrian Wing. And what we can see is the relief that they had in stone, and the British took it to London, of when Lachish fell to the Assyrians. The person that, the ruler that destroyed Jerusalem was Sennacherib, and he lived in Nineveh. And here is the depiction of Sennacherib as they themselves did it, and you can actually go to the British Museum. I actually was there and I saw it. You can see it right there. So this is in stone. Well, when the Assyrians decided to conquer Jerusalem, this is the way they did it. The armies of the Assyrians came from the north. Of course, this is the north here, south, east, and west. This is the Mediterranean Sea. So the armies of the Assyrians came by this route here because all of the conquering armies, they wouldn't come to the center of Israel because it's more desert-like and you have mountains and it's more difficult to do. So everybody went by this particular side in here that was closest to the ocean. So once they came at this point, what they did is that they went east, and there was a town called Lachish. So first they destroyed Lachish, and then after that, they went to Jerusalem, and it was in Jerusalem where the first temple that we had was destroyed, and we ended up in the Babylonian exile. And in the relief that you have in the British Museum, I hope that you can all see it here. What you see here are the depiction of the Assyrian archers. So here they are throwing their arrows, and this is against Lachish. They did not do a relief on Jerusalem, but they did it for what they did in Lachish. And I'm going to show you all of that in a second. The Assyrians were the first recorded terrorist army. So if you see here, and this is highlighted so you can see it a little better, here are two Assyrians. They have a stake in here, and here is an Israelite prisoner that is actually being impaled. And you can see it here too. And this is a rampart going up into the upper parts of Lachish. So anytime that they captured a prisoner, they will impale the prisoners. So everybody from within, outside of Lachish and inside of Lachish could see it. Here's another thing that they used to do, and it's shown here. Here is an Israelite prisoner. Here is an Assyrian soldier, and he is actually skinning the prisoner alive. And then what they would do is that they would take the skin and plaster it up against the walls of Lachish until Lachish fell. And this is all in stone. And this is interesting since we have two musicians with us here today. I know that both Gary and Mike are musicians. This is interesting. Here are the Israelite prisoners being sent to exile in Babylon. Can you see this thing in here? This prisoner is carrying this device. This prisoner is carrying this device. These are both musical harps. So Gary, when you play the piano, this is what you're doing 3,000 years later.
Or the guitar.
Yeah. It's an early Taylor.
Oh, can I ask a question? Lachish, was that a large city? I don't think we've ever heard of it.
Oh, really? Gary, you heard of Lachish, right? Oh my.
I've never heard of it, seriously.
Okay, anybody who is listening to this thing, have you heard of Lachish? Because, you know, you read it in the Bible?
Sure.
I'm not familiar with it myself.
Okay, well, that's why we're here tonight.
It actually exists today also. It's a moshav.
Yes, there is moshav.
There's a moshav Lachish.
That is correct, Ahuva. Okay, so now you know that one of the persons who is with us tonight, Ahuva, read her, who is Israeli. She just said that there is a moshav in what used to be Lachish from before.
Have you heard of Kiryat Gat?
That's correct too. Kiryat Gat.
Okay, it's right southeast of Kiryat Gat.
Correct.
So that's the area.
Well, we have an Israeli, so she knows a lot. Well, to answer the question of how large the town of Lachish it was, as far as we know, so take this with a grain of salt because, you know, we have to look at extra biblical sources to try to get it. The Bible doesn't say it. We believe that the town must have been somewhere between 35,000 and 50,000 people, as far as we know.
Was it a trading spot? I mean, you know, it must have some value in terms of people going there.
Okay, it had tremendous value because many of the caravans that were going from south to north and from north to south actually went through the town of Lachish.
So did we own it? Was it Israeli?
I'm sorry?
Was it Israeli? I mean, did we own it? You know,
Yeah.
It's a Hebrew town.
Yeah.
Yes, as a matter of fact, if I can go back in here for a second. Okay, this part in here was all part of Judea. So Lachish was part of Judea and so was Jerusalem at the time. Okay, so here's Lachish right here, which is slightly southeast or southwest of Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. Southwest.
And the other thing I was going to ask you, this horrible way of skinning people, that's pretty gruesome. Is this something that had been known? They have done this before?
Okay, the Assyrians were terrible. The Assyrians were the first nation to establish a standing army, the first one. And the way that they wanted to conquer lands and conquer cities is that, let's say they would go to Judea, for example.
I thought you were watching this.
They would attack a smaller town. So their target actually was Jerusalem, but Jerusalem must have had 150,000, 200,000 people. So what they did was...
Go ahead, go do it.
They would go to Lachish first. They would attack Lachish and do it as badly as they possibly can with as much terrorism as possible. Then after it, Lachish, or the smaller town that was easier to conquer, was conquered, then they would go into the real target, the larger town, the larger city, and they would go to Jerusalem. And in fact, they stood outside of the Jerusalem gates and they said, unless you guys surrender, we're going to do to you what we did at Lachish. Ahuva, am I correct?
Something like that.
Okay.
Setting an example. Setting an example.
That was an example. They said, unless you guys...
It's also at that time, the place for them to run away, if they had to run away from Jerusalem, they couldn't go any more north because that was already conquered. So the only place they would be able to run away to was into the desert, which is the Judea desert, that's Lachish a part of. So, so they had to try to avoid that. So once they conquered Lachish, these people could not go anymore into Lachish. Nobody could run into Lachish any further.
Yes, they destroyed it completely, and it was only excavated something like about 100 years ago, 120 years ago. Okay, and this is a very famous painting that you see in here. This is the destruction of the first temple. So as you can see, what the Assyrians did is that they would go up on top of, let's say, one of the walls, and these were the defenders. Now that the defenders became as part of the conquered army, they would throw them out from the wall, so everybody could see it. And if you can see here, here's a menorah that's being taken out right here. You see it? Okay, so this is from the first temple. Here's another very famous painting. What you can see is Jerusalem in flames, and here is the long file of the exiles that were sent to Babylon. Now, the Babylonians did to us the same thing as they did to everybody else. Whenever they conquered a people, they would take the intelligentsia, the priests, the educated people, the individuals who were the richest, and they were the ones that were exiled. The ones that remained were the peasants. And that's what they did to us, which is which explains why we set up the Babylonian Bible in Babylon, because all the priests, the Kohens, who were highly educated, well, the Kohens now had nothing to do because the temple was destroyed and there were no more sacrifices and they weren't being used. So they apparently used their time with their helpers, which were the Levites, to set up the Babylonian Bible, which is the one that we enjoy today. Now, King Zedekiah knew that the Babylonians were coming, and the Bible says that he built a wall that was at least 10 feet wide. And everybody thought that that was an exaggeration. Well, guess what? About 60 years ago, they started digging in here, and all of a sudden, here is the wall that is in this particular picture is about 7.5 feet wide. So the Bible was right. The Bible was not exaggerated. We found it. Well, Sennacherib, after the destruction of Jerusalem, he was so happy that he made this thing. And by the way, this was found about 100 years ago, and it was translated. It's called the Prisms of Sennacherib. And this is what Sennacherib says. As to Hezekiah is our king. That was the king that reigned during the time when the Babylonians conquered and destroyed Israel. So as to Hezekiah, the Jew who rebelled against me meaning Sennacherib, I have trapped him in Jerusalem. In other words, he circled Jerusalem as a bird is captured in its cage. He was very happy about what he did. Very proud of the fact that he conquered and destroyed Jerusalem and wanted everybody to know about it. Well, here's another famous picture. We were now in Babylon, and this picture is, you remember the saying that by the waters of Babylon, that is to say, by the river of Babylon, we sat and we mourned and we cried about the destruction of Jerusalem. And as you can see in this picture, they're all very dejected, and the Babylonians would come over to us several times a year and say to us, sing to us a song about Zion. And our answer was, how can we sing to you when we don't have Jerusalem anymore? And you remember, may our tongue cleave to its root of the house. In other words, that I would not only be able to sing, that my right hand would forget its cunning, so I couldn't write and I couldn't play an instrument. You remember all of that, I'm sure. Well, I'm going to spend a lot of time on this picture. This is this is Isaiah's vision. And this is extremely important. So I'm going to spend some time in it. This person right over here in the picture, supposedly, is the prophet Isaiah. And notice a few things. First of all, God is depicted on a chariot. And surrounding the chariot, you have these beings with the faces of a lion, the face of a some kind of, yes. So I'm going to ask you a question, because this is Isaiah's vision. Isaiah was saying to everybody, we're going to go back to Judea. But what do we do now that we're here in Babylon and we do not have a temple and we cannot do sacrifices? So what Isaiah said is, we here in Babylon, we're still getting, as you can see down here, we're still getting the laws that were given to us by our God. But God is depicted as being on a chariot. And now let's take a look at these beings with the faces of animals, because this is very important. So I'm going to ask you a question. Suppose I say to you right now, think of a country that is represented by a bear. What country would you say it is?
It's Russia.
Russia. If I say a tiger, what country would you say that is? China. And if I say an eagle, what country would come to your mind?
US.
The US.
America.
Okay. So Isaiah's vision is that they had these animals with, during his time, the best, from the best of our knowledge, is that he was trying to say there are four major military powers. You've got Egypt, you've got Babylon, you've got Persia, and you've got the Hittites. So these animals here represent those four. But notice, God is above them. So God, we consider, according to Isaiah's vision, God was, I'm going to mention three omnis. This is the first omni. Our God is omnipotent. That is to say, our God is above and more powerful than any of those four other powers. The second thing is, God is giving us his laws, and God loves us. This is as opposed to the gods from everybody else. Everybody else's gods, you had to do something for God or their gods. Our God is the first one that said, I love you. Therefore, we came up with the idea of what we call omnibenevolent. So omnibenevolent is a God that loves you. We also say that God is on a chariot, meaning God is portable. Before we went into the Babylonian exile, we could only do something for God in the Jerusalem temple whenever we sacrificed animals. But now that God is on a chariot, God is portable, God is everywhere. It's the third omnipresent. Therefore, according to Isaiah, we can worship God anywhere, including Babylon, not just in the Jerusalem temple. And the joke that I tell when I talk about this thing, if I may use a joke, is that before we went into the Babylonian exile, God only had one zip code. And after we left Babylon, God was in every zip code. Therefore, we can pray to God in Miami Beach, and we can play in Malden, and we can do it in Peabody, we can do it everywhere, because God is omnipresent. So he was saying to the exiles in Babylon, we can pray to God here. We do not just have to do it in Jerusalem.
Michael, may
Yes.
I ask you a question? What puzzles me, I look at this and it's a very impressive picture. But what puzzles me is that, first of all, there's an actual face for God. I mean,
Yes.
it's not even muted or anything. It's a specific face. Secondly, if I want to think of God as omnipresent and, you know, above everything, I would go and make him a larger figure and one whose face you really can't see. So this is almost down to human size, and that's I'm puzzled about that.
Okay, the quick answer is that this was not painted by any Jewish person. This was actually this was painted by a Christian. We were, as you know, we're not allowed to, have any idols. We're not allowed to paint God. We're not allowed to do any of that. So this is a Christian's view of the Isaiah vision. So we did not do that. But if you were Jewish, you probably would have painted it the way that you're talking about.
This
Okay?
is almost too human-like.
Well, I mean, if you take a look at, with the fact that we're not allowed to have any icons, we're not allowed to have any
Graven images.
statues, we're not allowed to have any paintings. We didn't do any of that. So all these paintings were done by non-Jewish people.
So looking at that, I should already have, that was my clue, that we don't make graven images. So this obviously was not our God as such. This was somebody's depiction of it.
That is correct, Myrna. But, I thought that in order to explain Isaiah's vision, because if you go to the book of Isaiah and you start reading Isaiah's vision, boy, if you understand it, you are a much more intelligent person than me. It is very difficult.
So
Tomorrow we will be reading some. If they want to join us, they are welcome, and we'll be doing
what I was going to say is, what was he smoking?
Okay.
Well, no, he speaks a lot in allegoric form, and he uses a lot of parables.
All right.
Everything is,
That is a great explanation. Thank you, Ahuva. Okay. Well, so.
Thank you, Michael.
All right. So the second temple, actually, the temple of Herod, in the year 0 and so forth and so on. It's now in CE of the current era. It was also destroyed on Tisha B'Av, just so that you know. And after the destruction of the temple, the Romans came up with the Arch of Titus, And this is a very famous relief that you have in the inside of the Arch of Titus. And what you can see in here are the Jewish prisoners, the Judean prisoners, and they are actually carrying with them the menorah and all of the artifacts that we had in the Second Temple. And this is now the fall of Jerusalem in 70 CE.
Okay, Michael, what happened to the Ark of the Covenant? Was it still supposedly in the first
I'm
temple?
still looking for it.
Oh, okay, we're looking for it, but it disappeared shortly after the disappearance of the 10 tribes. So it's been gone for, by this time, you know, which is the year 70 of the current era, it had already been gone for at least 600 years, 700 years. Okay, so here's a question. We went into exile in Babylon for only 60 years. But then after the destruction of the Second Temple, when we went into exile, now this exile took 2,000 years. So how did we survive? We survived because in the first exile, in the Babylonian exile, first we said we can worship God any place. The second thing is that we started putting together the beginnings of prayers. So prayers were taking the form, rather than doing sacrifices, we started reading prayers. After the destruction of the Second Temple, all of that was there. So the rabbis made it easy for us to survive because we didn't have to have the physical structure of a temple. We could pray to God, and we can pray without having to do animal sacrifices. And this is my last slide, so it's a summary slide. So based on the Babylonian exile, after the destruction of the first temple, which is we're commemorating it this week, which is Tisha B'Av. 4 things. God can be revered anywhere. That was brand new as far as the Jewish religion was concerned, and it happened in Babylon because God is omnipresent. God is also going to return us to Zion. So God is omnipotent, more powerful than any of the other nations that were surrounding us. The other thing is that God is going to forgive our sins. This was Isaiah speaking, and also Jeremiah, because God is omnibenevolent. That is to say, God loves us. So God is omnibenevolent. And once we can do all of these things with God, prayer was now the substitute for the sacrifice, and this is how we survived for 2,000 years until we finally went back to Israel and Jerusalem. Thank you very much.
Yay, Dr.
Thank you, Dr. Mike.
Wonderful.
That was great.
Are there any questions for Dr. Mike? It's fantastic stuff.
Mike, you have to say, are there any questions that I can answer?
Oh no, you're going to get every one. That's how it works here. The Torah Study Underground.
You can always answer any question with "I don't know." I mean,
Yeah, that's. I'll have to look that up. Very good question. Happens a lot here.
I think one very important point as to what else kept us going for 2,000 years, and the miracle of miracles is that the fact that so many other strong, big nations have gone through living in Israel, in the land of Israel of that time. And no one was able to establish itself as a nation, an actual nation in Israel, nor were they able to survive it, which is another one of the miracles of the 2,000 years until we got there. And what really kept us going, least Orthodox to the most Orthodox, from the least believer to the most believer, is the covenant. And that is the Brit, which we have the Brit Milah. And that is what really kept us going for the 2,000 years. That was, no matter what, a Brit Milah was done, the bris for the boy, and that was a very important point. And the country was kept waiting for us to get back there after 2,000 years.
Well, that's very good. And actually, there's another thing that I didn't mention, and that is that we were keeping the Sabbath. In our prayer book, there's a little saying that more than the Jewish people have kept the Sabbath has kept the Jewish people.
Absolutely.
Michael, I do have another question though, and it's because I should have tried to look this up before. I remember after the destruction of the first temple, and then things were starting to build up and Babylon became sort of a home or whatever. Then there was a migration back to Israel before we had another problem. And there was a lot of intermarriage. And was it Ezra who tried to break that up?
Yes, when the intermarriage didn't happen as much as in Babylon as with the Judeans who remained in Judea. They were the ones that were intermarried. So when Ezra came back, he started putting his foot down on that. He said, even those of you who are intermarried, you have to get divorced.
Yeah.
So it was Ezra, but it was for the people that actually remained in Judea. And they were marrying not just people who were not necessarily. The big problem that he had is that do you have spouses who believe in not monotheism, but many gods? And what you're going to do is that we're pure because we're monotheistic. So if your spouse can accept monotheism, that's okay. If your spouse says, no, I am going to keep all my God, that is where he had a problem.
You know, I have to share this with you. This goes way back when I was a kid at Sunday school. And I remember this became, they discussed it. Who would you go with? Would you go with your mother or would you go with your father? And I, to this day, remember going home and crying all night long. I couldn't sleep. And I said, how does one decide? I was like 8 years old and I couldn't decide how would I do this without hurting somebody's feelings. So that's why when we were talking about it, it came up. That's a very difficult thing to do.
Yeah.
Isn't it great that we're welcomed anywhere now, right? Yay!
Almost.
No, I didn't quite go that far.
Hallelujah! God is so good.
Michael, that was very ecumenical.
Thank you, Dr. Mike. Wonderful talk, Dr. Mike. I love it. Anybody else? Because we should get into the Torah because it's so good. We can learn Torah together. Hine Matov. It's so good and wonderful that brothers and sisters should gather together. Anybody? Any other questions?
Gary, are you going to sing for us, Hine Matov?
I could sing Hine Matov, and I was also going to sing HaPores.
Well, let's do it. Let's hear it.
So we'll do both. How's that?
Wonderful.
Guys, can you see Cynthia Garber? Because about 20 minutes ago, she
I'm
called
here
me.
now.
Oh, you're
I'm
here
here
now?
now.
Yeah, because
Finally.
you got back in.
I missed all of the talk. I don't know what went
Really?
wrong. So he'll have to repeat it for me. So start
I
again.
recorded it.
Yeah, I recorded it, so I'll put it
I'm
up.
still a host here.
הנה מה טבו מניים, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טבו מניים, שבת אחיות גם יחד. הנה מה טוב, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב, שבת אחים גם יחד. שבט לחיות כאן יחד. ברוך אתה, אתה אדוני הפורש סוכת שלום. שלום עלינו ועל כל עמו ישראל. ברוך אתה, אתה אדוני הפורש סוכת שלום. שלום עלינו ועל כל עמו ישראל. ועל ירושלים ועל כל עמו. ועל ירושלים שלום. ועל ירושלים ועל כל עמו. ועל ירושלים שלום. ברוך אתה, אתה אדוני הפורש סוכת שלום. שלום עלינו ועל כל עמו ישראל. שלום עלינו ועל כל עמו ישראל.
Magnificent, Gary. Oh, just
Toda
beautiful.
rabah.
Love it. So welcome to the Torah study. Thank you, Dr. Mike, for warming us up for Thursday's mourning period, day of mourning. And we're glad to see so many new faces tonight. Just to give you a background, this is kind of our Torah study, and we're not ordained anything. We're not rabbis. We're not ministers. We just love God. So it's kind of like a free-for-all. Everyone gets to read a little bit of Torah, and everyone can interpret how they wish. Mwah, the beauty of it. So to begin with, does anyone want to start reading the first? I'm going to need help with the Hebrew on this. Va'et chanan, is that correct?
Va'et chanan.
Can everyone see that? This is the Reformed Judaism translation of Deuteronomy. Myrna, you're up.
All right. Moses pleads with God to let him enter the land of Israel with the people, but God once more refuses his request. Moses orders the children of Israel to pay attention and follow the laws given by God in order to be worthy of the land they are about to receive. Specific areas of the land are set aside to serve as cities of refuge. The covenant at Sinai and the Ten Commandments are recalled. Once again, the people are exhorted to heed God's commandments. Moses speaks the words of the Shema, the credo of Judaism, and commands Israel to show their love for Adonai and keep God's laws and ordinances. Moses warns the people not to commit idolatry by worshiping the gods of the nations they will conquer in Israel.
Fantastic. So we'll go to the first part. And this actually, Kevin brought this up a couple of weeks ago about how Moses does plead with the Eternal to go into the Promised Land. So it's because I had to look it up too, and I'm like, oh yeah, Kevin, you're right on. So does anyone, Myrna, you want to continue?
Yeah. I pleaded with the Eternal at that time, saying, "O eternal God, you who let your servant see the first works of your greatness and your mighty hand, you whose powerful deeds no God in heaven or on earth can equal. Let me, I pray, cross over and see the good."
There it is.
Wait a minute, where were you? Oh, see the good land on the other side of the Jordan, that good hill country and the Lebanon. But the Eternal was wrathful with me on your account and would not listen to me. The Eternal One said to me, "Enough, never speak to me of this matter again. Go up to the summit of Pisgah and gaze about, to the west, the north, the south, and the east. Look at it well, for you shall not go across yonder Jordan. Give Joshua his instructions, and imbue him with strength and courage, for he shall go across at the head of this people, and he shall allot to them the land that you may only see. Meanwhile, we stayed on in the valley near Beth Peor.
Wow, that's great. Why don't we hold right there? Because does anyone want to comment on this? It's
You know, I didn't remember that he exhorted God again. So in other words, he had not given up.
right, absolutely.
And he also seemed to think that that perhaps like his kids would like take over for him, that it would kind of stay. I don't remember which pasha that was in.
But what made him think that God would renege? Because he's done it before? But in this time, he was pretty adamant.
Well, my feeling is that if you take a look at everything that Moses accomplished for us and for God, and why wasn't he allowed to go into the promised land? You know, the explanation that is given is that rather than touching the stone, he hit the stone. So something as small as that prevents a person such as Moses, who has taken us out of Egypt, gave us the Ten Commandments, and stayed with us in spite of all the mishigas that the Israelites were giving to him, that for that he couldn't go into. So he says, God, whatever I did wrong was so minor compared to what I have accomplished. Why don't you let me go into the promised land?
Okay, so I'm going to give you a little bit of a more of the conservative look, and I will involve Rashi here a little bit. You know what Rashi was. Rashi is one of our greatest commentaries. A little bit difficult to understand at times, but he still is very, very important. So Rashi says that it was a problem. Had he crossed over with the rest of the Jews, they will rely on him very much while they were again in Eretz Israel or in Eretz Canaan at the time, and he really needed to make them independent. And breaking them into independence, the first thing would be to remove the one that they have entrusted themselves in his hands and has led them for so many years. So that was one of the reasons. And the plead here, which he goes back to plead, he doesn't really plead, he pleads, and he does say that he understands God's reasoning. And I just want to come, I just want to see it. I just want to be able just for one time to pray and to do your word, God's word in Eretz Israel, with absolutely full giving up my command over the people. And, but that was basically the fear. So the command goes to Joshua, obviously, who takes over, and it's very interesting to know also that Moses does make sure that he has somebody to take over when he's gone. And unfortunately, something that Joshua did not do and caused the chaos that we had after that with the period of the judges. That's just a little bit overview.
No, I agree with you, because when he talks about the minor infringement that he had done, and if you really, I always said that the one thing that was really big, that when he lost his temper, is taking the tablets of the Ten Commandments and throwing them down and breaking them. That to me was monumental. So if anybody were going to pick on Moses for something that he had done that was a real negative, I would have thought it would be that one. But I think the idea is that it could have been anything. He wasn't going to go.
Mm-hmm. Can I add something?
Exactly. He wasn't going to go no matter what. And that was not really the reason. It was just a reasoning, but it was not really the real reason, right?
Okay, go ahead, Gary.
Yeah, God was like looking for an excuse, I think, like to use anything for it. But the thing with the rock is that it was not totally minor, because part of the reason God was upset is that it was supposed to be an opportunity for Moses to demonstrate God's power and holiness before the people. And when Moses hit, not only did he not talk to it, but when he hit it, he said, "Okay, you rebels, shall we bring water forth from this stone?" It's almost like he was doing it himself.
He empowered himself, right?
And that he, referring to the people as rebels when, despite the fact that they, kind of rebelled against God's laws throughout the 40
Right.
years, but all they were complaining about now was for water, which was valid. So he kind of lost it with them. But there again, too, like who was saying, like it's almost like he couldn't go in because it would be like sending your kids off to college and going with them,
Yeah.
But don't
The Hebrew word chanan that they use, which it means really not that he asked for, but he implored for. And when we use the word to implore for, it's almost like we know we don't deserve it, but still want it.
Go ahead, Kevin.
my view on this is that God is supreme, and if you look in the past and all the other teachings, he is a jealous God, and I think that he wanted the people to be on their own, but he also wanted to separate himself from Moses, because the people were looking up to Moses as almost a God, because he spoke to God all this time. That, with the idea that he did a couple of arguments with God on the way, with the water, and again with the tablets. So I believe God said, okay, this is where you're going to stay. You did a good job, but I can't have any gods along with me. I think he put himself in the back.
Good stuff. Absolutely. I think there's so many different ways to look at it, and it's. I think it's all valid. I think Moses, man, he had such an amazing life, and to see it come to this end. I mean, at least he knew that there was going to be some fulfillment, even though he wasn't going to be there to see it. But he did see where they were going, and he knew that they were going to go in this time, not like the first time when they said no. But anybody want to pick up? We're at chapter 4 now, verse 1.
I can read. Can you hear me?
Oh, Cynthia, yes, please.
Yeah. Okay, I never can tell if I'm muted or not. And now, O Israel, give heed to the laws and rules that I am instructing you to observe, so that you may live to enter and occupy the land that the Eternal, the God of your fathers, is giving you. You shall not add anything to what I command you, nor take anything away from it, but keep the commandments of the Eternal your God that I enjoin upon you. You saw with your own eyes what the Eternal did in the matter of Baal-Peor, that the Eternal your God wiped out from among you every person who followed Baal-Peor, while you who held fast to the Eternal your God are all alive today. See, I have imparted to you laws and rules as the Eternal my God has commanded me, for you to abide by in the land that you are about to enter and occupy. Observe them faithfully, for that will be proof of your wisdom and discernment to other peoples, who on a hearing of all these laws will say, surely that great nation is a wise and discerning people. What great nation is there that has a God so close at hand as is the Eternal, our God, whatever we call? Or what great nation has laws and rules as perfect as all this teaching that I set before you this day? But take utmost care and watch yourself scrupulously, so that you do not forget the things that you saw with your own eyes, and so that they do not fade from your mind as long as you live, and make them known to your children and to your children's children. The day you stood before the Eternal, your God, at Horeb, when the Eternal One said to me, Gather the people to me that I may let them hear my words, in order that they may learn to revere me as long as they live on earth, and may so teach their children. You came forward and stood at the foot of the mountain. The mountain was ablaze with flames to the very skies, dark with the densest clouds. The Eternal One spoke to you out of the fire. You heard the sound of words, but perceived no shape. Nothing but a voice. God declared to you the covenant that you were commanded to observe, the 10 Commandments, inscribing them on 2 tablets of stone. At the same time, the Eternal commanded me to impart to you laws and rules for you to observe in the land that you are about to cross into and occupy.
Can we stop right here for a second? It's so powerful, isn't it? Just the visions and all the drama that's here, the recapping of everything. I mean, what I love in particular is this make it known to your children and your children's children. I think that is so powerful, especially today when I feel like many people have no real concept, or they've maybe had a bad experience with religion in one shape or form or another. And I think it's so important that we, maybe, I know for my own self, I didn't really raise my kids with any kind of direction as far as religion goes, but now I'm like, I got to get to my grandchildren once I have them, and they're going to learn Torah at least, and maybe the Gospels, we'll find out. But that's the beauty of bringing their children up. It's so important. Any other thoughts?
Yes, and Mike, I would like to take your thought and go one step further. We're still saying the same thing a little bit differently. Now we say ledor vador, from generation onto generation.
It's beautiful.
May I add something before we go off and forget about what we just talked about?
Mm-hmm.
Can you guys hear me?
We got you, Myrna. Yes.
All right, there's one thing as we kept going on and it hit me. Moses was how old at this point?
120.
Well, close to 120.
Okay. I think this is, you know how much dementia we are seeing today, especially a lot with older people? How about saying that God is saving Moses from being an embarrassment to himself? Maybe he realizes that Moses is losing it and let him go down as a hero before he becomes a bubbly idiot. Well, that's extreme. But I'm just
Don't forget that this man was.
By the way, he was not made to be a hero because we don't even know where he was buried.
That's right.
So this is also he was very human all along and remained so after his death just as well. Okay? So it was not. The idea of creating another vision of somebody like God that we are going to, no, does not exist. And if you look at all our leaders, if you're looking at Big King David, Big King Solomon, Jeremiah, all of them, okay? They all did wrong. They were all human. They were not perfect. And that was very important to remember.
Which incidentally makes the Bible even more credible. Because we did not take our heroes and made them into semi-gods. We took our heroes the way they were as humans.
Right. With all their faults.
Yeah. With all our faults, absolutely.
They all had faults, right.
Interesting.
And the idea was that we learn from those faults, which we supposed to.
I'm not so sure we learned that fast today. Perhaps we've forgotten a lot.
We didn't learn that fast then either.
Hey, by the way, I have a medical question for you guys.
Okay.
Where was the first place in the Bible where medicine is mentioned?
As medicine? I mean, as an actual physician kind of thing?
Yeah. Okay, so where is the first place in the Bible where medicine was mentioned?
I would say Egypt, no?
Are you ready?
I would say Greece.
When they took a little bit of vino to ease the pain.
All right, so here's the answer. Is when God gave Moses 2 tablets.
Oh my God. Oh boy, you really had us fall into that trap, didn't you?
He did it again.
and asked him to call him back the next morning.
All
He
right.
came back for 2 more.
So, who's going to read next for your own sake? Who can read for us?
If
Okay,
I
I
know,
hope-
if you,
I hope
you know
I think you
what
do.
else strikes me very interesting here at the beginning? When
Okay.
it says, you know, when you fulfill the commandments, to make sure you do not remove any or add any. Very important to remember. We do not make more of, we don't need more than what we got. As many as we got is plenty.
Sounds good to me. Who would like to read? Please.
Somebody read English.
Michael, why don't you name someone?
I will name, how about Annie? I haven't heard from Annie yet, and I'd love to hear from Annie.
Okay.
But it's not.
There you go.
For your own sake, therefore, be most careful, since you saw no shape when the Eternal spoke to you at Oreb out of the fire, not to act wickedly and make for yourselves a sculptured image in any likeness whatever, the form of a man or a woman, the form of any beast on earth, the form of any winged bird that flies in the sky, the form of anything that creeps on the ground, the form of any fish that is in the waters below. And when you look up to the sky and behold the sun and the moon and the stars, the whole heavenly host, you must not be lured into bowing down to them or serving them. These the Eternal your God allotted to other peoples everywhere under heaven. But you the Eternal took and brought out of Egypt, that iron blast furnace, to be God's very own people, as is now the case. Now the Eternal was angry with me on your account, and swore that I would not cross the Jordan and enter the good land that the Eternal your God is assigning you as a heritage. For I must die in this land. I shall not cross the Jordan, but you will cross and take possession of that good land. Take care, then, not to forget the covenant that the Eternal your God concluded with you, and not to make for yourselves a sculptured image in any likeness against which the Eternal your God has enjoined you. For the Eternal your God is a consuming fire, an impassioned God. When you have begotten children and the children's children and are long established in the land, should you act wickedly and make for yourselves a sculptured image in any likeness, causing the Eternal your God displeasure and vexation, I call heaven and earth this day to witness against you that you shall soon perish from the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess. You shall not long endure in it, but shall be utterly wiped out. The Eternal shall scatter you among the peoples, and only a scant few of you shall be left among the nations to which the Eternal will drive you. There you will serve gods of wood and stone, made by human hands, that cannot see or hear or eat or smell. But if you search there, you will find the Eternal your God, if only you seek with all your heart and soul, when you are in distress, because all these things have befallen you, and in the end, return to and obey the Eternal your God. For the Eternal your God is a compassionate God, who will not fail you, nor let you perish. God will not forget the covenant made on oath with your fathers.
This is great. Can we stop right here for a minute? I mean, isn't this what happened? Dr. Mike, didn't we just learn about this? The Eternal will scatter you among the peoples. Only a scant few will be left among the nations. I mean, this is wow, what a revelation.
Well, Michael, as a matter of fact, the prophet Jeremiah actually was quoting from here.
Wow.
Jeremiah was saying to everybody, he says, you know, unless you stop sinning against your Lord, you're going to be dispersed. Jeremiah was actually saying that, and he was quoting from this passage.
That's incredible. Wow. Any other thoughts before we go forward? I think we're getting to the Shema, right? This is going to be the biggest.
Oh, yeah.
This is coming up. I can feel it coming. All right. Who can read? Kevin, can you read today, or Iris? Who wants to read? Now, of course, I don't have it up yet. Hold on. If I can get my stuff together. Here we go. Do you see it?
Iris, you have to unmute.
Yeah, we can't hear you. Ask to unmute. We can't hear you, Iris. Oh, I guess she's passing. Kevin, we can hear you even though you look like you're muted. Hold on. We are going to be at number 32. When we go, Kevin, can you see it or no?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, Iris. Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
You have but to inquire about bygone ages that came before you ever since God created humankind on earth. From one end of heaven to the other, has anything as grand as this ever happened, or has its like ever been known? Has any people heard the voice of God speaking out of fire, as you have and survived? Or has any deity ventured to go and take one nation from the midst of another by the deepest acts, by signs and portents, by war, by mighty hand and outstretched arm and awesome power, as the eternal your God did for you in Egypt before your very eyes? It has been clearly demonstrated to you that the eternal alone is God. There is no one else. From the heavens, God, let you hear the divine voice to discipline you on earth. God, let you see the great divine fire, and from amidst the fire you heard God's words, and having loved your ancestors, chose their ears after them. Personally, in great divine might, led you out of Egypt, to drive from your path nations greater and more populous than you take to you into their land, and assigned to you as a heritage, as is still the case. Know, therefore, this day, and keep in mind that the eternal alone is God in heaven above, and on earth below there is no other. Observe God's laws and commandments, which I enjoin upon you this day, that it may go well with you and your children after you, and that you may long remain in the land that the eternal your God is assigning to you for all time. Then Moses set aside 3 cities on the east of the Jordan, to which a male killer could escape, one who unwittingly slew another without having been an enemy in the past. He could flee to one of these cities and live. Bezer in the wilderness, in the Tabberland, belonging to the Reubenites, Ramoth, Gilead, belonging to the Gadites, and Golan in Bashan, belonging to the Manassites. This is the teaching of that Moses set before the Israelites. These are the decrees, laws, and rules that Moses addressed to the people of Israel after they had left Egypt. Beyond the Jordan in the valley at Beth Peor, in the land of King Sihon of the Amorites, who dwelt in the Heshbon, whom Moses and the Israelites defeated after they had left Egypt. They had taken possession of this country, and that of King Og of Bashan, the 2 kings of the Amorites, which were on the east side of Jordan, from Aroah on the banks of the Wadi Aman, as far as Mount Zion, that is Hermon. Also the whole Arabah on the east side of the Jordan, as far as the Sea of Arabah at the foot of the slopes of Pisgah. Moses summoned all the Israelites and said to them, Hear, O Israel, the laws and rules that I proclaim to you this day. Study them and observe faithfully. The eternal our God made a covenant with us at Horeb. It was not with our ancestors that the eternal made this covenant, but with us, the living, every one of us who is here today. Face to face, the Eternal One spoke to you on the mountain out of the fire, stood between the Eternal and you at that time to convey the Eternal's words to you. For you were afraid of the fire and did not go up the mountain, saying, The Eternal am your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods besides me. You shall not make for yourself a sculptured image, any likeness of what is in the heavens above, or on the earth below, or in the waters below the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them. For I, the Eternal your God, am an impassioned God, visiting the guilt of the parents upon the children, upon the 3rd and upon the 4th generations of those who reject me, but showing kindness to the 1000th generation of who reject me, but showing kindness to the thousandth generation of those who love me and keep my commandments.
Michael, I think that we should stop in here for a minute and say that these are the 10 commandments.
Yes. Did we pass the Shema? Is the Shema in here?
Well, the way they said it is, "Hear, O Israel."
Yeah.
Perhaps we can all say it together. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Can I add something? Can I say something?
Of course.
In the V'ahavta, and the way the interpretation is written here, sometimes the English doesn't capture the true meaning of the way the Hebrew words are in the Torah, where it says, know therefore this day, and keep it in mind that God is in heaven above and in the earth below, there is none other. The way the Torah says it, it's more like, know this day and set it upon your heart.
Yeah.
And that sounds like it could be kind of redundant, but what the real meaning is, though, is you could know the commandments, but maybe they're not in your heart, so that your actions aren't guided by them. If you merely know them, but you don't internalize them to the point where they're in your soul, so that all your actions flow through, like the commandments, they're in line with the commandments. That's the important thing to remember, not just to know them, because sometimes what you know doesn't translate into what you do.
Amen. That's wonderful.
That's
You know, and sometimes we treat these things like we memorize them and we just say them without rationalizing. Hey, it's easy enough to repeat. You memorize and repeat. What you have to do is to stop and think about what you're actually saying. It makes a big difference.
And to internalize it so that they become, you're actually living it instead of just knowing it. And
it's not lip service.
Martin Luther King had said something about the biggest danger isn't theoretical atheism, it's practical atheism. People that give lip service to God but not life service.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Also, what I like about this passage too is how it's really intense, how God is trying to explain, like, I don't want you to follow any other gods. I mean, he says it over and over, all through the Torah. And to me, and Kevin brought it out today again, like the jealous God. He's a jealous God, and I'm going to tell you, that's almost like the one thing I know that I was made in the image of God is I can be very jealous. And when I felt this unbelievable jealousy in my life, I'm just going to say this one thing, and when I felt it, and I look at these words now, it's like I understand what God is saying here. I understand how jealousy can really drive your heart to really hurt in ways that, and I believe that jealousy that some of us might have felt in our lives comes right from God's heart. He knows, and he wants us to feel all the feelings that he feels, and I think it's, or she, and that's what I believe. That's my.
That's very difficult, Michael, because you're saying he's like human. Human beings are jealous. Shouldn't we have had God in a different plane? Shouldn't we say, God isn't going to be jealous like human being is going to be jealous?
Oh yeah, I'm not saying. I'm saying that it comes from God and it goes down to humans. So whatever form we get, it's just a little tiny portion of him, like everything that we have.
We were made in his image.
There you go, Kevin. That's right.
And Archie Bunker would say, hey, God can be jealous. He's God.
We get that jealousy from him.
Michael, I have to respectfully disagree.
That's what it's about. Welcome.
I'll tell you what.
Great.
One of our commandments in the Bible is do not covet. And what does that mean? We cannot be jealous of the others.
Oh, I'll tell you. You know what?
So,
absolutely. You are absolutely right. But I'm going to tell you. Yeah.
Probably one of the most difficult commandments to keep. We can understand do not kill. We can understand respect our parents. We can understand a lot of it. Do not steal. Do not covet is probably one of the most difficult one.
But you're talking about an action
Coveting.
that goes to what, if I covet something, if I want something other than what belongs to me.
It's because of jealousy that you want it, not
but when
because you want it as to make yourself better. That's
No, but it's jealousy is different in the sense that jealousy is something that you experience, like sadness, like happiness. It's something that sometimes just happens, whether we like it or not. It can be just like,
it causes you to feel sad or happy.
right.
Well, it caused covenant. It is on a, the way I understand it. Coveting something is wanting it, and you're going to try to take it. I don't see the plane of jealousy in there. It could cause jealousy.
Coveting,
I understand that.
no, coveting comes because of jealous. You see somebody has something that you want. You're jealous of why they have it.
No, I think you're talking about greed. I think you're thinking of desire. You're desiring something outside of
Value
yourself.
something.
So it might be a little bit different. I think jealousy is something that happens sometimes when we're not expecting anything. Sometimes, other times it might come on in other ways. But I think you might be a little. I think maybe our translations might be a little bit off. But I think you're thinking that you want something, you desire it so much, you want it. But if you have something and somebody takes it from you, ooh, that's sometimes where jealousy comes in.
Jealousy.
Yeah, that's where jealousy comes
Well, I don't know.
in. Go ahead, Dr. Mike, go ahead.
Also, we need to remember that God has fought jealousy all along. You know, we're starting with Cain and Havel. We are going to Joseph and his brothers, and I mean, it's been going all along. And that's
Hallelujah. That's the way of the world. It's the way of the world. Dr. Mike, you got anything for me? Go for it.
Well, what I was going to say is that my interpretation of the word covet is that you want something that already belongs to somebody else.
Somebody else, yeah.
Okay, so that's my interpretation of the word covet.
Right.
Good.
So
Okay, go ahead.
You can want something very badly. Let's say, for example, that you want to become a rabbi, let's say. And you are very intense about becoming a rabbi, but there's nothing wrong with that because you're not taking it away from anybody else.
But a good example of this coveting is King David and Bathsheba.
Right.
And God's jealousy doesn't have to do with coveting. God's jealousy is basically in the sense of God being jealous about not wanting you to worship other gods.
All right. So if you take King David coveted Bathsheba, but Bathsheba was already married to somebody else. So if she had been, let's say, available, it would have been okay. But he didn't do that. He wanted the wife of somebody else. That's coveted.
Yeah, and it made sure Uriah got goodbye out of the picture.
Yeah.
Fantastic. All right. So where were we with our Torah portion? And back to the Torah. I believe we were at you shall have no other gods beside me, as Gary said, and I think that's important. Let me continue. You shall not make for yourself a sculptured image, any likeness of what is in the heavens above or the earth below or in the waters below the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the eternal your God, am an impassioned God, visiting the guilt of the parents upon the... Have we read this before? Upon the children, upon the third and upon the fourth generations of those who reject me, but showing kindness to the 1,000th generation of those who love me and keep my commandments.
But Michael, don't you think?
Yeah.
Don't you think that sometimes we drift away from that? Meaning, I know in the Jewish religion they don't have statues and stuff, but in some of our jewelry, we have the Star of David. I don't know if you can see that. The Star of David, and we have that we wear. Is that not going against?
We don't worship those things.
All right. The Star of David is only a symbol. It is not a god.
Yeah.
So what we're talking about is not having images of God. That's what we're talking about. Because what happens in all other religions is that after, let's say, for example, that you have a statue of God, let's say Zeus. Okay, let me take a Greek god. Okay, so you take Zeus. Well, you had these beautiful, huge statues of Zeus that existed in some of the temples in Greece. Well, after a while, the Greeks started worshiping the statue, not what Zeus was all about. Am I right, Mike?
I would guess that sounds right.
Right.
I mean,
all right. So what we said is, you cannot have a statue or a likeness of our God, because eventually what you're going to do is that you're going to be worshiping the actual image itself, the physical image, and forget about what God is all about.
wow.
And the Star of David is really what King David had on his shield.
Yeah.
So
Right.
that's what protected him, okay? So that it's just a drawing, and we kept it as the way as he was protected by his shield. So does the Star of David today protects us.
And
But
also,
we
some
have
people
God to
tie.
protect them.
Tie, or they wear mezuzah.
Right.
Saying.
But
Yeah.
God
Mezuzah is something
protects them.
different. The mezuzah.
Well,
You know, there is something very interesting about this, Kevin, because and you can see this. There's a YouTube about the Star of David, and how it is. How do you spell David in Hebrew? It's Dalid,
David.
Vav
Vav,
Dalet.
Dalid. And if you take those letters, somehow, it's like you can make the Star of David out of those letters, I believe.
Yes.
I think that's how it. And so it's almost like he probably had his own star. It's like his own emblem. Yeah. So it's interesting. I could probably. I'll try to dig that up at another time. But it's when I saw that, I was like, wow. I mean, there's so many things.
Okay, and Kevin, one more thing. We also have images of the menorah.
That's true.
Okay, so images of items, it's okay. We have an image of the first temple. We have an image of the second temple. What you cannot have is images of God itself.
But
Can I
still,
add
as
something?
we go in and out of a doorway, we always, to the menorah, and that's like saying something to the menorah, not.
No, it's to the mezuzah, but the mezuzah, it's not the mezuzah. It's what's in there.
The laws. That's right.
It's what's in there. It's not the actual housing. It just houses.
Again, the prayer that's in there is not God.
Right.
No, it's not. But God commanded us to.
And so we're giving our worshiping to something that He said. And when you read something, it said, "Don't even make any signs or."
No. Time out. We were commanded to write that mezuzah and put it on our doorposts, and there is a reason for it. That every time when we leave the house, we remember who we are when we are going out,
Yep.
and remember who we are when we come back into the house. And that is the reason. And it protects us. But we were commanded to put that mezuzah. That is not worshiping something different. That is God. That mezuzah.
We have,
God.
just
It's
like
a
when
reminder of us, the commandment that we have with God.
in the synagogue, we have fixtures and we have all kinds of things, but we don't worship them.
Right.
They
Right.
aid us like in worshiping God. They add to the ritual, just like the mezuzah. So it's just a reminder of God's commandments.
Like the Shabbat candles, the candelabras,
And I was gonna
cup of
add
wine,
that when God says that my name is, God says my real name is I am what I will be, and that in itself indicates that God isn't fixed. So aside from a physical engraved image, you shouldn't have like an image of God engraved in yourself. Like you should be able to your understanding should be able to continue and evolve. It shouldn't be like fixed and carved right into stone where it stays the same and never changes.
Okay, and by the way, to remind everybody, the Islamic religion is exactly the same. They do not want to have images of their religious figures.
That's right. All right, shall we pick
All right.
it up from you
Understood.
shall not, I'm sorry, Kevin?
That's understood. Yeah, I understand that.
Fantastic. All right, Cynthia, would you like to read again? I think
Sure.
you did such a great job.
You shall not swear falsely by the name of the Eternal your God, for the Eternal will not clear one who swears falsely by God's name. Observe the Sabbath day and keep it holy, as the Eternal your God has commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is the Sabbath of the Eternal your God. You shall not do any work, you, your son or your daughter, your male or female slave, your ox or your ass, or any of your cattle, or the stranger in your settlements, so that your male and female slave may rest as you do. Remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Eternal your God freed you from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore the Eternal your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. Honor your father and your mother as the Eternal your God has commanded you, that you may long endure, and that you may fare well in the land that the Eternal your God is assigning to you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You, men, shall not covet your neighbor's wife. Likewise, none of you shall crave your neighbor's house, or field, or male or female slave, or ox or ass, or anything that is your neighbor's.
Michael, can we stop it in here for a second?
Yes, absolutely.
So if you go back to 18, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife because she belongs to your neighbor. That's where covet comes in again.
Got you. All right. That sounds good. And Cynthia, can we pick it up again? I think we're at 19 now.
The Eternal One spoke those words, those and no more, to your whole congregation at the mountain with a mighty voice out of the fire and the dense clouds. God inscribed them on 2 tablets of stone and gave them to me. When you heard the voice out of the darkness while the mountain was ablaze with fire, you came up to me, all your tribal heads and elders, and said, the Eternal our God has just shown us a majestic presence, and we have heard God's voice out of the fire. We have seen this day that humankind may live though addressed by God. Let us not die then, for this fearsome consume us. If we voice of Eternal our God any longer, we shall die. No mortal ever heard the voice of the living God speak out of the fire as we did and lived. You go close and hear all that the Eternal our God says, and then you tell everything that the Eternal our God tells you. We will willingly do it. The Eternal heard the plea that you made to me, and the Eternal One said to me, I have heard the plea that this people made to you. They did well to speak thus. May they always be of such mind to revere me and follow all my commandments, that it may go well with them and with their children forever. Go, say to them, return to your tents, but you remain here with me, and I will give you the whole instruction, the laws and the rules that you shall impart to them, for them to observe in the land that I am giving them to possess. Be careful then to do as the Eternal your God has commanded you. Do not turn aside to the right or to the left. Follow only the path that the Eternal your God has adjoined upon you, so that you may thrive and that may go well with you, and that you may long endure in the land you are to possess. This is the instruction, the laws and the rules that the Eternal your God has commanded me to impart to you, to be observed in the land that you are about to cross into and occupy, so that you, your children, and your children's children may revere the Eternal your God and follow, as long as you live, all the divine laws and commandments that I adjoin upon you, to the end that you may long endure. Obey, O Israel, willingly and faithfully, that may go well with you, and that you may increase greatly in a land flowing with milk and honey, as the Eternal, the God of your ancestors, spoke to you. Hear, O Israel, the Eternal is our God. the eternal alone.
There's the Shema.
Shema.
That's the Shema. Yeah, there we go. That's how it is. Okay. Fantastic, Cynthia. You took us all the way to chapter 6, verse 4. Hear, O Israel, the eternal is our God. The eternal is alone. The eternal is one. Echad. Echad. One. One God. Fantastic. I just love meditating on that. It's our favorite. It's my favorite song every Saturday morning. Shema.
And the Via Hafta.
In fact, I love it so much I have it on my ring. It's Shema. I got this in Jerusalem. Wonderful. And Via Hafta. Yes. Via Hafta. Oh, it's wonderful. Any comments? Anything? Anybody? I just want to hear some words. Annie, what do you think, Annie? How you doing?
I'm fine. I'm just, it's the Ten Commandments. It's pretty basic. The things always God number one.
Yeah.
And if you keep that in mind, the rest of it seems to not be as difficult as it might be.
Absolutely.
Those are powerful words, but then you talk about David. He didn't listen. Thou shalt not covet, and look what he did with Bathsheba, just like Colonel was saying before.
Well, poor Uriah got the bad part about that. You know what's interesting, though? Think about how important it is because it's so repetitive. It's kind of right in front of your eyes in many different places. And if you don't get it, then you get a problem.
Well, maybe they have to keep repeating it because
so you
we're so constituted that you have to pound it into us because...
Right. Because we're human, and it's easy to go astray.
That's true. It's so true. We are human, and just everyone in the Bible is so human. It's wonderful. And that's what we love. And how did that happen, Gary? You were able to go. Wait a minute. What did I do now?
To do what?
I don't know. I saw Annie get a kiss from somebody.
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh,
Just sitting a few feet away. I'm just using my computer.
Fantastic! Wow, magic.
Because Annie doesn't have a nice microphone and she doesn't use earbuds.
6 foot distancing.
Yeah.
No distancing for us, right, baby?
Oh, yeah. That's sweet. Gary, would you like to read?
Where are we? Oh, Hear, O Israel.
Hear, O Israel.
Ba Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Li'olam Va'ed. Yehavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chal v'chal v'chal nafshecha v'chal miodecha.
Why is it so better in Hebrew? It's just so beautiful.
The eternal is our God, the eternal alone. You shall love the eternal God with all your heart, with all. Well, we already read that, right?
No, we haven't. We haven't.
Okay. See, and here's the part that I was talking about before. Here it says, "Take to heart these instructions."
There it is. There, yeah.
With which I charge you this day. Impress them upon your children. Recite them when you stay at home and when you are away, when you lie down and when you get up. Here is what al mezuzot beitecha uvisharecha. Bind them as a sign on your hand, your tefillin, and let them serve as a symbol on your forehead, and inscribe them al mezuzot beitecha uvisharecha upon your doorpost of your house and on your gates.
Beautiful, beautiful.
When the eternal your God brings you into the land that was sworn to your fathers Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to be assigned to you, great and flourishing cities that you did not build, houses full of all good things that you did not fill, hewn cisterns that you did not hew, vineyards and olive groves that you did not plant, and you eat your fill, take heed that you do not forget the Eternal who freed you from the land of Egypt, the house of bondage. Revere only the Eternal your God, and worship God alone, and swear only by God's name. Do not follow other gods, any gods of the peoples about you. For the Eternal your God in your midst is an impassioned God, lest the anger of the Eternal your God blaze forth against you, wiping you off the face of the earth. Do not try the Eternal your God as you did at Massah. Be sure to keep the commandments, decrees, and laws that the Eternal your God has enjoined upon you. Do what is right and good in the sight of the Eternal, that it may go well with you, and that you may be able to possess the good land that the Eternal your God promised an oath to your fathers, and that all your enemies may be driven out before you, as the Eternal has spoken.
Amen. Do you know that do not try the Eternal your God as you did at Massah? And I can't recall exactly what happened there, but I know that they were saying, well, if God is such and such, he should be able to do this. But do you know there is one part of the Hebrew Bible where it's okay to try God? Do you know this? This is something that Rabbi Alon came out, and I was like, ooh, Rabbi Alon, he mentioned this. It's in the book of Malachi, which is, I think it's like the last book of the Hebrew Bible, Dr. Mike. And in it, God says, and he's pretty much impassioned, and he's saying to bring your gifts to me, which means, you know, to your synagogues, to your churches. Give me your gifts and watch and test me. And he says, test me, and won't you see that I will pour down all the gifts of heaven onto you. It's amazing. It's an amazing thing, and I felt that in my life when I've done that. So I do recommend that. Especially, there's so many of our worship places that are hurting. You know, I mean, Gary closed the temple, and you know, I mean, our church is always like, are we going to make it every year? But it's one of the only times that God says, try this, try it, test me, and it's like, otherwise, don't test them, don't do it. But
let's face it,
though. We
though.
closed the temple. We kind of created a new one.
yeah, absolutely.
But still, yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, in Jeremiah also, God says something very similar. Is that prove me wrong?
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you do, I'll adhere. If not, you'll have to come back to me.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Do you want to read Ahuva? Is that all right?
Sure.
Yeah, where are we?
Number
20.
Where are we? 20?
Yep.
Okay. All right, 20.
So when in time to come your children ask you, what mean the decrees, laws, and rules that the eternal our God has enjoined upon you? So say to your children, we were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, and the Eternal freed us from Egypt with a mighty hand. This is something we read in the Haggadah on Passover, by the way.
That's right.
The Eternal wrought before our eyes marvelous and destructive signs and portents in Egypt against Pharaoh and all his household. And us, God freed from there in order to take us and give us the land promised on oath to our fathers. Then the Eternal commanded us to observe all these laws, to revere the Eternal our God for our lasting good and for our survival, as is now the case. So be therefore to our merit before the Eternal our God to observe faithfully this whole instruction as God has commanded us.
Fantastic. All right. We're getting to the very end, so do you want to continue?
Sure. When the Eternal your God brings you to the land that you are about to enter and possess, and God dislodges many nations before you, the Hittites and the Girgashites and the Amorites and the Canaanites and the Perizzites and the Bites and the Jubilees. I'm not familiar with these names in English, I'm sorry.
That's
Seven
okay.
nations
That's okay.
much larger than you. And an Eternal your God delivers them to you, and you defeat them. You must doom them to destruction. Grant them no terms and give them no quarter. You shall not intermarry with them. Do not give your daughters to their sons or take their daughters for your sons. So they will turn your children away from me, worship other gods, and the Eternal's anger will blaze forth against you, promptly wiping you out. But this is what you shall do to them. You shall tear down their altars, smash their pillars, cut down their sacred posts, and consign their images to the fire. You are a people, yeah?
Yep. Okay, go for it.
You are a people consecrated to the Eternal your God. Of all the peoples on earth, the Eternal your God chose you to be God's treasured people. It is not because you are the most numerous of peoples that the Eternal grew attached to you and chose you. Indeed, you are the smallest of the peoples. but it was because the Eternal favored you and kept the oath made to your fathers, that the Eternal freed you with a mighty hand and rescued you from the house of bondage, from the power of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Know therefore that only the Eternal your God is God, the steadfast God who keeps the divine covenant faithfully to the 1,000th generation of those who love God and keep the commandments, but who instantly requites with destruction those who reject God, never slow with those who reject, but requiting them instantly. Therefore, observe faithfully the instruction, the laws, and the rules with which I charge you today.
Dun 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 dun. That is the end of today.
The Parsha.
Parsha. Yes.
Beautiful.
This is so fantastic because we read all these readings in every Saturday, every Friday night, mostly, right? This is the real beauty.
Every day.
Yes, it's wonderful.
Mike, and also in Passover.
That's Passover. Yeah, the big the journey out of Egypt, the passing over.
But you know, I have a thought in listening to this, and maybe I got from the passage I took the wrong thought. But this gives license to those who would destroy another person's faith and the things that go with it, wouldn't it?
I know, it's so hard because...
I mean, when you analyze that...
Well, I think historically it's very tough to read a lot of these things. And I mean, of course, Dr. Mike's whole this destruction of the temples is very difficult. I mean, and I feel like for whatever reason, humans choose violence in a lot of ways, and it does. And I think there were a lot of religious wars, however, I hope we're coming out of this phase. I'm hoping that we are coming to this new age that we learn so much about, and I'm hoping that we can get beyond this. And I think that's one of the things that we were talking about last Wednesday in Bible study, was that we've never known peace. We've never known a peaceful world, which is so sad. But I know what you're saying, though, Cynthia, and I know we struggle with this because it's like, but it's so important. I think that's the reason why we get these words and these instructions, because eventually the world's going to come around to God. That's my feeling. That's my belief. And I know that this sounds very harsh, but it's so important. It's so vital. I mean, this is the basis of many modern countries today. All of what's in the Torah. They read the Torah. They studied it. A lot of people that weren't Jewish and realized that this stuff it's the truth. And it's gone on for so long, and it's survived so long. And I agree with what you're saying, like how can we end this people at arms and battles and the struggles with each other. And I think the only thing is that the Shema. The only thing is the Shema that makes us one. There's only one real unity for any of us, and I think it is in God, no matter what our religion is. And I know it sounds horrific, but I think in the end, if we're all on board, that's when we get peace. Thoughts?
You're saying if we're all on board. Oh, somebody else talking, I'm sorry.
No, go for it, Marna. Go.
Well, what I was going to say is that was the secret of the whole thing, if everybody gets on board. But this is the difficulty, that if we look around, we have people who, yes, like the Muslims, they preach to their God, which is like Allah, which is like ours in most respects. However, the difference is these people want to convert you to their way of thinking. And this is where you come into a lot of difficulty. And
this is where the translation here goes bad. This is where the translation here goes very, very bad. If we look at the Hebrew, it says, if they try to influence your children, or if they try to influence by taking them in marriage, or if they try to influence your children by teaching them the wrong way or their way of life, this is when you go and break their statutes or their faith. It's not unless they try to pursue your children or your next generation or you to try to convert you into what they are, or if they fight a war against you for what you are. This is when you do it. That's what the Hebrew says. So the translation here is a little bit off.
Well, thank you for that insight, Ahuva. That is, as I'm looking at it now, I mean, it does seem like there is a little bit of a cause and effect, like you're saying, that I have it queued up here at number 4. You
It
shall
says
not...
if they will try to compromise your Jewishness, even by friendship, once they try to convince you to go the other way, in a nice way or in a bad way, either one, okay, this is when you go against them.
Very
complicated.
Yeah,
You know, we have the brotherhood of man, and we try to say that all men are created equal, and you know, we all have this.
Absolutely, and they believe in what they believe in. That is fine, but let us believe in what we believe in. Don't try to convert us.
Hallelujah.
We don't. That's why it's very important to remember that Judaism does not follow to try to convert anybody else. We are not a messianic religion. That's a very important thing to remember, okay? That's the difference between us and Christianity, for that matter. Because the Christians try to convert
Yes,
the Jews over generations.
All right, for everybody, we do not proselytize.
That's true.
Right.
Hey, by the way, Michael, Ahuva has done so well. I think that we have to absolutely have her for every one of the
Yeah, she
Thank
has
you.
good insights. Absolutely. How about Berta? I haven't heard from Berta tonight. How are you, Berta? You can unmute. Can you unmute? I think you're not. I think you're still muted. I think you're still muted, Berta.
She might not be able to unmute herself. You might have to do it as the host.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
There should be this little microphone thing, though.
Yeah.
The symbol of a microphone. You should be able to hit that.
Yeah.
Mute.
All right, she's
Here
unmuted
she is.
Hear me now.
Yes, we've got you.
I'm in Miami. I'm Dr. Mike's neighbor.
Fantastic.
Yes, as a matter of fact, she is.
Great. Thanks for joining us and staying with us all this time, Berta. You're very...
And now, Mike, you need to bring her tomorrow to my class.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you for including me here. What a knowledgeable group this is.
Well, you know what I'm going to do is that since I am in the email of Temple Menorah where Ahuva is, when I get the email tomorrow that has all of that information, I'm going to pass it along to you.
That's very good. I
Okay.
thank you. It's
I'd
will
love
be
to
my
say that
pleasure.
This has actually been a delight because it's more challenging and more interesting to have differences of opinion. We know each other so well that I think sometimes we complement each other. This way, it gives us more thought, more information rather to think about. So I really appreciate it. We love to all Jews like to get involved and talk, and like getting that way.
We
Right?
learned new things. We were able to hear different viewpoints, learn new things tonight.
Absolutely.
This has been a very interesting evening.
Yes, a lot of stuff.
Well, I want you to know, Mike, that I learned a lot again.
Thank you, Dr. Mike. Thank you for kicking things off, and we'll be thinking of the temple on Thursday. And
Well,
Excellent. Good for you guys. It's very nice that you're doing this.
Okay, good night, everybody.
Good night, and thank you
Good night.
again.
can we have a Shema,
you.
Gary? Do you think?
You want a Shema?
Oh, I love it. I love it, Gary. Oh man, I wish.
Go, Gary.
I love
All
it.
right.
You know I love it. I live on this.
Everybody muted? Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Baruch Shekivod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Shekivod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Brilliant! Woo! Gary! Love it, love it. Everyone have a great night. God bless. Thank you so
Everybody,
much.
thank you all. Thank you, Dr. Mike. Thank you all for being here.
And may we all stay in good health so we can do this again.